My siblings celebrated after I was cut out of the will. They hadn't read the last page. The moment my brother announced that I had been cut out of our mother's will, my siblings actually applauded. I will never forget the sound. 3 people clapping in a room where our mother had been dead for less than 20 minutes. My sister Claire smiled. My older brother Daniel leaned back in his chair like he had just won a competition. And my younger sister Melissa whispered that Mom had finally made the right decision. I sat there quietly. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't even look surprised. Because they had made one mistake. They had celebrated before the attorney finished reading. None of them had read the last page. And that last page had my name on it. My name is Natalie. I'm 37 years old, and for most of my life I was the least important person in my family. At least, that's how my siblings made me feel. There were 4 of us. Daniel was the oldest, Claire came next, Melissa was the youngest, and then there was me. I was right in the middle, but somehow I was always treated like I belonged somewhere outside the family. Daniel was the successful one, Claire was the responsible one, Melissa was the baby, and I was the difficult one. At least, that's what my parents called me whenever I refused to do what everyone else wanted. The truth was much less dramatic. I simply asked questions. I wanted to know where money went. I wanted receipts when we shared expenses. I didn't like borrowing money from people. I didn't like owing favors. And I especially didn't like the way my siblings treated our parents' money as though it already belonged to them. That became important later, much more important than I ever expected. Our mother, Margaret, had built a successful medical supply company with our father. It wasn't some enormous corporation, but it became very profitable. By the time Dad died, the company owned several warehouses, commercial properties, investments, and a significant amount of cash. Mom continued running everything herself. She was 71 when Dad died. She could have retired. Instead, she worked harder. She told everyone she didn't want to spend the rest of her life sitting around waiting to die. That was Mom. Stubborn, sharp, and almost impossible to manipulate. My siblings didn't see her that way. They saw an aging mother who eventually had to divide everything among her children. Daniel wanted the company. Claire wanted the house. Melissa wanted enough cash to pay off her debts. I never asked for anything. That became the first thing they hated about me. Whenever Mom asked what I wanted, I always told her the same thing. I wanted her to be healthy. I wanted her to stop working if she wanted to. I wanted her to enjoy the rest of her life. I never asked about the inheritance. That didn't mean I didn't know there was money. I simply didn't believe it was mine before Mom died. My siblings thought differently. Daniel began asking Mom about the company when he was in his 30s. At first, he asked casually. Then he became more direct. He wanted to know how much the company was worth, which properties were debt-free, which accounts were held personally, which ones belonged to the business. Claire was less obvious. She preferred to discuss the family house. She constantly talked about how much work she had done for Mom. She reminded everyone that she had taken Mom to appointments. She had helped organize Dad's funeral. She had stayed at the house during holidays. Melissa was different. She didn't pretend she wasn't interested in money. She openly talked about it. She had accumulated debt over the years. Credit cards, a failed business, a divorce, then another business. Every time something went wrong, Mom helped. I warned her not to. That made me the villain. I wasn't trying to control Mom. I simply didn't want my mother to spend her retirement savings cleaning up problems my sister kept creating. Mom usually listened. Sometimes she didn't. That was her right. I never forgot that. Then, about 3 years before she died, something changed. Mom began reorganizing everything. She hired a new attorney. She changed accountants. She moved several properties into a trust. She separated some business assets from her personal estate. She also started keeping certain documents in a safe deposit box that none of us knew about. My siblings noticed. They became nervous. I didn't. Mom never explained what she was doing. I didn't ask. One evening she called me. She asked me to come to her house alone. I arrived around 7. She was sitting at the kitchen table with several folders in front of her. I knew immediately that something serious was happening. She asked me whether I trusted her. I told her yes. She asked whether I trusted myself. That question confused me. She told me I would understand later. Then she gave me a sealed envelope. She told me not to open it. I asked what it was. She said it was something I might need someday. I wanted to argue. Instead, I put it in my purse. Mom looked directly at me. Then she told me something I didn't understand at the time. She said that when she died, my siblings might become people I no longer recognized. I laughed nervously. She didn't. She told me that grief could make people irrational, but money could make people honest. She said I should remember the difference. I took the envelope home. I put it in a drawer, and I forgot about it, or at least I tried to. 2 years later, Mom was diagnosed with cancer. Everything changed. Suddenly, the arguments about money stopped, at least temporarily. We became a family again. Daniel visited, Claire came almost every weekend, Melissa called constantly, I was there almost every day. I helped Mom with medication, I drove her to appointments, I cooked, I cleaned, I sat beside her when she couldn't sleep. There were nights when we didn't talk at all. We simply watched television together. Those were some of the best nights of my life. During those months, Mom never mentioned her will, not once. Then, 3 weeks before she died, she asked me about the envelope. I had almost forgotten it existed. I found it in the drawer. It was still sealed. Mom asked whether I had opened it. I said no. She smiled. Then she told me to keep it somewhere safe. I asked whether I should give it to her attorney. She said no. She wanted me to keep it. That was all she said. 3 weeks later, she died. And 20 minutes after that, my siblings celebrated my disinheritance. The attorney had gathered us in Mom's living room. There were 4 of us: Daniel, Claire, Melissa, and me. The attorney was an older man named Robert Hayes. He had worked with Mom for years. He looked uncomfortable from the moment he entered the room. I assumed it was because he knew how difficult the reading would be. I was wrong. He began with the usual formalities: Mom's name, the date, her mental capacity, the fact that the document had been signed and witnessed properly. Then he began distributing the personal belongings. Claire received several pieces of jewelry. Melissa received family photographs. Daniel received Dad's watch. I received Grandma's old recipe books. I was actually happy about that. Then came the financial assets. Daniel received a significant cash inheritance. Claire received several investment accounts. Melissa received a smaller cash amount. Then the attorney paused. He looked at me. I knew what was coming. He said Mom had intentionally excluded me from a specific portion of the estate. Daniel smiled. Claire looked at me. Melissa actually laughed. Then Daniel said something about how Mom had finally stopped rewarding me for being difficult. I didn't respond. The attorney continued. He said I had been removed from the first section of the inheritance: the house, several personal accounts, some investment funds. My siblings heard that part, and they stopped listening. Daniel leaned back. Claire smiled. Melissa whispered that Mom had finally realized who had actually been there for her. Then Daniel said I had been cut out of the will. I looked at the attorney. He looked back at me. There was something strange in his expression, not pity, something closer to patience. I didn't understand. My siblings started celebrating. They were laughing. They were already discussing the house. Claire wanted to sell it. Daniel wanted to use it as collateral for his business. Melissa wanted cash. They talked as though Mom had already disappeared and left behind a shopping list. I sat there quietly. Then Robert cleared his throat. Nobody noticed. He cleared it again. Daniel finally stopped. Robert said the reading wasn't finished. The room became silent. Daniel told him that if there was something else, he should just say it. Robert looked at the document. Then he turned to me. He said there was a second section, a section specifically added by Mom after the first version of the will had been drafted. Daniel's expression changed. Claire stopped smiling. Melissa looked confused. Robert explained that Mom had left a final page, a page that was not part of the section they had just heard, and that page contained instructions regarding the majority of her estate. Daniel asked what that meant. Robert didn't answer him. He continued reading. Mom had deliberately left the impression that I was being cut out, but she had done it for a reason. The first section was designed to make my siblings believe they had won. The second section changed everything. Robert turned the page, and then he read my name, not as a beneficiary, as the sole successor trustee. I felt my entire body go cold. Daniel stood. He asked what that meant. Robert explained. Mom's major assets weren't being distributed immediately. They were being placed under the family trust, and I had been appointed the person responsible for controlling that trust: the house, the commercial properties, the investment portfolio, the company. Almost everything my siblings had been celebrating was no longer theirs to divide. They were beneficiaries. I was the trustee. But that wasn't even the biggest surprise. Robert turned another page. Mom had included instructions, very specific instructions. Daniel would receive his inheritance only if he agreed to certain conditions. Claire's inheritance had conditions too. Melissa's did as well. And those conditions were not about money. They were about behavior. Mom had apparently spent years documenting how each of her children had handled money, responsibility, and family obligations. I had no idea, but she did. And she had kept records. The final page explained why. Mom wrote that she had watched her children become adults. She had helped them, supported them, rescued them, and sometimes she had accidentally made their lives worse by solving problems they should have solved themselves. She said she had made mistakes as a mother, but she intended to make one final decision correctly. Then came the sentence that changed everything. She wrote that she did not trust Daniel, Claire, or Melissa to manage the family assets together, not because they were incapable, because they had repeatedly demonstrated that they valued what they could take from the family more than what they could build for it. My siblings looked furious. I couldn't move. Then Mom explained why I had been chosen. She wrote that I was the only child who had never asked what she would inherit, the only one who had never pressured her for money, the only one who had repeatedly told her no when she tried to give me more than I needed. Then she wrote something that made my eyes fill with tears. She said I had been the child she worried about most, not because I was weak, because I had spent my whole life believing I had to earn the right to belong. She wanted to make sure I never had to do that again. Robert reached the final paragraph. Then he stopped. He looked at my siblings. He told them that Mom had left one final instruction. He said it needed to be read exactly as written. Then he continued. Mom wrote that if her children ever celebrated because they believed Natalie had been excluded from her inheritance, they should be allowed to celebrate. She wanted them to believe it, because she wanted to know what they would do when they thought I had nothing. I stared at the paper. My mother had planned this. Not the cancer, not her death, but this moment. She had deliberately created a situation where my siblings believed they had won, and they had immediately shown her exactly who they were. The final line was short. Robert read it slowly. It said, "If they celebrate before the last page, let them. They have spent their entire lives measuring my love in money. Perhaps the last page will finally teach them the difference between receiving an inheritance and being worthy of one." Nobody moved. Daniel's face was white. Claire was crying. Melissa looked furious. I couldn't speak. Then Daniel turned toward me. He demanded to know whether I had known. I shook my head. I truly hadn't. That made him even angrier. He accused me of pretending. He said Mom had manipulated everyone. He said the will was unfair. I finally spoke. I told him that if he believed the document was illegal, he could challenge it. He didn't respond. Because he knew something. Mom had been meticulous. She had used independent attorneys, independent witnesses, medical evaluations, and years of documentation. She had protected the will against exactly what was happening now. The attorney gave each of us a copy. Then he handed me a second envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Mom. The envelope had my name on it. I didn't open it there. I couldn't. I took it home. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Mom and I had spent hundreds of evenings together. I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. It began with an apology. Mom apologized for making me believe, even for a moment, that she had chosen my siblings over me. She said she knew it would hurt. She said that was why she had hesitated. But she needed me to understand something. She hadn't excluded me. She had separated me. There was a difference. She had separated me from the inheritance because she didn't want me to become another person fighting over money. She wanted me to become the person who decided what happened to it. Then she explained the real reason she had chosen me. It wasn't because I was the smartest. It wasn't because I was the most successful. And it wasn't because she loved me more. It was because I had already proven something. I knew how to say no. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Mom said people who knew how to say no were often the only people capable of protecting something valuable. She said my siblings had spent years asking what they could get. I had spent years asking what was right. That was why she trusted me. I kept reading. Mom had created a plan for the family company. She didn't want Daniel to own it. She didn't want me to own it either. She wanted it eventually transferred into a foundation that would provide scholarships and small business grants. The family properties would fund it. The company would support it. My siblings would receive their inheritances over time, but only if they respected the conditions she had established. And if they didn't, the money would go to charity. I stopped reading. I stared at the wall. Mom had built a system where my siblings couldn't simply fight me for control. They had two choices: grow up or lose the inheritance entirely. Then I reached the last paragraph. It was the part I will remember for the rest of my life. Mom wrote, "Natalie, if they hate you after reading this, let them. You have spent enough of your life trying to be loved by people who only know how to measure love by what they receive from you. Do not spend the rest of your life proving your worth to them. You already know it." I put the letter down, and for the first time since Mom died, I cried. Not because of the money, not because my siblings had been humiliated. I cried because my mother had finally said the thing I had spent my entire life waiting to hear. I was enough. I had always been enough. The inheritance was simply the proof she had chosen to leave behind. The next morning, Daniel called. He wanted a meeting. I agreed. All four of us sat around the same table where they had celebrated my supposed disinheritance. Nobody was laughing this time. Daniel wanted to challenge the trust. Claire wanted to negotiate. Melissa wanted immediate access to her money. I listened. Then I explained the conditions. There was no negotiation. The rules were Mom's, not mine. Daniel accused me of enjoying the situation. I told him I didn't. Claire accused me of taking Mom's side. I reminded her that Mom was dead. There was no side to take. There was only the plan she had left behind. Melissa began crying. She said Mom had always loved me more. That was the first thing I disagreed with. I told her that Mom hadn't loved me more. She had trusted me more. And trust wasn't something Mom had given me. I had earned it. The room went silent, because everyone knew that was true. My siblings had spent years assuming the inheritance was a reward. Mom had seen it differently. She had treated it as a responsibility. And suddenly, I understood why she had wanted the first page to look like an exclusion. She wanted them to reveal themselves. She didn't need me to tell her who they were. She already knew. She just wanted them to know too. That day we left the table without resolving everything. The legal process took months. There were arguments, threats, attempts to challenge the trust. My siblings even contacted distant relatives and tried to convince them that I had manipulated Mom. But the documents were stronger than their stories. Eventually they stopped. Daniel accepted the conditions. Claire did too. Melissa struggled the most, but eventually she did as well. I became trustee, not owner. That distinction mattered. I managed the properties. I supervised the company. I hired professionals. I made sure the foundation was established exactly as Mom wanted, and I never touched a dollar that wasn't legally mine. The first scholarship was awarded 6 months later. The recipient was a 23-year-old woman who wanted to start a small medical supply business. When I saw her application, I almost cried. It reminded me of Mom. A woman trying to build something without waiting for someone to hand her a future. I approved the grant. Then I went home. I opened Mom's final letter again. I read the last paragraph, and I finally understood why she had written it. My siblings thought they had won when they heard I had been cut out of the will. They thought I had lost everything. But they had only heard the first page. They hadn't read the last one, and neither had I. Because the real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the trust my mother placed in me. She didn't leave me a fortune to make me rich. She left me responsibility to see whether I could protect what she had spent her entire life building. And that turned out to be worth far more than anything my siblings had celebrated that day. They thought Mom had left me nothing. They were wrong. She left me the last page, and that page changed everything. The months after Mom's death were nothing like I expected. I thought the hardest part would be grieving. It wasn't. The hardest part was realizing that becoming the trustee had changed my relationship with my siblings forever. Before Mom died, we had been dysfunctional. After she died, we became adversaries. Every decision I made was questioned. Every expense was scrutinized. Every meeting became an argument. Daniel wanted to know why I hired outside accountants. Claire wanted to know why she couldn't sell the family house immediately. Melissa wanted her inheritance accelerated. And all three of them kept making the same mistake. They thought I was trying to keep their money from them. I wasn't. I was trying to make sure Mom's final wishes survived long enough to matter. The first major problem happened when Daniel demanded control of the company. He claimed he had experience. He said Dad had always intended for him to take over. He reminded everyone that he had worked there for almost 10 years. That part was true. What he didn't mention was that Mom had spent those same 10 years quietly documenting his mistakes. She had records of missed payments, poor investments, questionable contracts, and several decisions that had cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. I discovered all of it after becoming trustee. It was uncomfortable reading. Daniel wasn't incompetent. He was reckless. There was a difference. He believed that because the company had survived his mistakes before, it would survive them again. Mom didn't agree. That was why she had removed his ability to control it. I hired an independent CEO. Daniel was furious. He accused me of destroying Dad's legacy. I reminded him that Dad's legacy wasn't a particular person sitting in an office. It was a business that had survived for decades. If protecting that business meant keeping him away from it, then that was what I would do. He didn't speak to me for 4 months. Claire was different. She wasn't interested in the company. She wanted the family house. She said it had sentimental value. I understood that. I had memories there too. But Mom's trust didn't allow anyone to simply take the property. It required the house to be maintained as an asset until certain conditions were met. Claire hated that. She said Mom had promised her the house verbally. Maybe she had, But promises made in conversations weren't the same as the legal documents Mom had spent years preparing. I refused to bend the rules. That made me cruel in Claire's eyes. Melissa was the most unpredictable. She wanted her money immediately. She had debts, a mortgage, credit card balances, and a business loan. She told me she needed the inheritance to start over. I believed her, but Mom's conditions were very clear. Melissa had to complete a financial counseling program before receiving the next portion. She considered it humiliating. I considered it reasonable. She had already received money from Mom several times. It had never solved anything. It had only delayed the consequences. So I held my ground. For the first time in my life, I understood why Mom had once told me that saying no was a form of protection. Not just for yourself, sometimes for other people too. Then something happened that none of us expected. The company discovered an old account. It had been dormant for years. Nobody knew about it, not even me. The account contained nearly $2 million. It had been created by Dad before he died. The money had been left untouched. I contacted the attorney immediately. He checked the documents. The account was included in the trust. That meant I controlled it. But Mom had left instructions for exactly what to do with unexpected assets. The money had to be used to expand the foundation. I followed the instructions. Daniel was furious. He said that money should have gone to the family. I reminded him that Mom had created the trust specifically to prevent that kind of argument. He said I was hiding behind paperwork. Maybe I was, but paperwork was exactly what protected everyone. That was when I realized something important. My siblings didn't actually want me to fail. They wanted me to bend. They wanted me to make exceptions. They wanted me to break one rule for Daniel, then another for Claire, then another for Melissa. And once I did that, Mom's carefully constructed plan would collapse. So I refused. Again. And again. Eventually, they stopped asking. Something else changed too. The family company began recovering. The new CEO discovered problems that had been hidden for years. Contracts were renegotiated, expenses were reduced, several investments were sold. Within 18 months, the company was more profitable than it had been when Mom was alive. I wasn't proud of myself. I was proud of her. Because she had been right. She had known exactly what she was doing. One afternoon, the CEO asked me whether I wanted to sell the company. A large corporation had made an offer. It was enough money to change every one of our lives. Daniel wanted the sale. Claire wanted the sale. Melissa wanted the sale. I didn't. Not immediately. I went back to Mom's final letter. She had written that the company wasn't supposed to be a trophy. It was supposed to be a tool. A tool for helping people build something of their own. So I declined the offer. Instead, we expanded the foundation. We created scholarships, small business grants, training programs, and eventually a program for women who wanted to enter the medical supply industry. That was the moment the inheritance stopped feeling like an inheritance. It became something else, a responsibility that could continue after Mom was gone. Then, almost 2 years after her death, I received a letter from Daniel. It wasn't angry. It wasn't demanding. It was short. He apologized. Not for the inheritance, for the years before it. He admitted that he had always believed Mom loved him more because she had given him more. He said he finally understood that she had actually been enabling him. He told me he had started rebuilding his career without the expectation that someone would rescue him. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say much. I told him I appreciated the apology. That was enough. Claire eventually apologized too. Melissa took longer, but even she eventually admitted that Mom had been right about her finances. She completed the counseling program, she paid off most of her debt, and she eventually started a small business that became profitable. For the first time, she wasn't asking anyone to save her. She was saving herself. That was probably the part Mom would have been proudest of. Not the money, not the company, not the foundation. The fact that her children had finally begun becoming adults. One evening, I returned to Mom's house alone. The property had been restored. The rooms looked almost exactly the same. I walked into the living room. Then I sat in the chair where Mom had spent her final months. I brought her letter with me. I read it again. The words hadn't changed, but I had. When I first read it, I had been hurt that Mom had intentionally made me believe I had been disinherited. Now I understood why. She knew my siblings. She knew what they would do if they thought there was nothing left for me. And she was right. They celebrated, they laughed, they planned how to divide things, they showed exactly what mattered to them. Mom didn't need to punish them, she simply let them reveal themselves. That was her final lesson. I folded the letter. Then I noticed something I had never seen before. There was writing on the back. Just one sentence. I had missed it because I had been so focused on the final paragraph. I turned the paper toward the light. The handwriting was unmistakable. Mom had written, Never let the people who underestimated you become the reason you underestimate yourself. I stared at it for a long time. Then I finally understood. The last page wasn't really about inheritance. It was about me. My entire childhood had been shaped by comparison. Daniel was smarter, Claire was more responsible, Melissa was more lovable, and I was always the one somewhere in between. I had spent years trying to prove I deserved a place at the table. Mom's final gift wasn't a seat. It was the realization that I had never needed permission to sit there. I had always belonged. My siblings celebrated when they thought I had been cut out of the will. They thought they had won. But they hadn't read the last page, and neither had I. Because the real inheritance wasn't the company, it wasn't the properties, it wasn't the money. It was the first time in my life that someone I loved had looked directly at me and said, "I trust you." That was worth more than anything Mom could have left behind. And that is the part of the story I carry with me now. Not the day my siblings celebrated, not the arguments, not the money. I remember Mom sitting at the kitchen table, holding that sealed envelope and looking at me with the calmest expression I'd ever seen. She knew exactly what was coming. She knew her children better than we knew ourselves. And before she died, she made one final decision. She didn't give me everything. She gave me something much harder to inherit: responsibility, trust, and the chance to prove that everything she believed about me was true. My siblings thought I had been cut out of the will. They were celebrating because they thought I had lost. But they had only read the part of Mom's story that they wanted to hear. They hadn't read the last page. And the last page was where my life finally began. In the end, my siblings didn't lose their inheritance. They lost something they had been taking for granted for years. The assumption that Mom's money belonged to them. The assumption that I would always be the one standing outside the family circle. And most importantly, the assumption that I would stay quiet while they decided what my life was worth. Mom's final page changed everything, but not because it made me wealthy. It changed everything because it finally showed me that she had been watching all along. She knew who asked for money. She knew who showed up only when they needed something. She knew who treated her like a mother, and who treated her like an account. She also knew me. I had spent years thinking I was the least important child in the family. Mom knew I was the only one who didn't need to be the most important. That's why she trusted me. Today, the family business is still operating. The foundation continues helping people start businesses of their own. My siblings eventually received what Mom intended for them. Not everything they wanted, but everything they had earned the right to receive. And strangely enough, we're closer now than we were when Mom was alive. Not perfect, not the way we were when we were children, but honest. That's probably the greatest thing Mom could have left us. I still keep her final letter. Sometimes I read it when I feel overwhelmed by the responsibility she left behind. And every time I reach the final sentence, I remember that day in the living room. The day my siblings celebrated because they thought I had been cut out of the will. They were laughing. They were already dividing Mom's belongings in their heads. They thought I had lost everything, but they hadn't read the last page. Neither had I. And that last page didn't say I was getting more money. It said something far more important. It said, my mother trusted me. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to wonder whether I was enough. I finally knew. My siblings thought the last page was where my inheritance began. They were wrong. The last page was where I finally stopped trying to prove that I deserved one.